All right, so as Coach Belichick would say, we are on to Cincinnati, discussing the Bengals here today, our second AFC North team. And spoiler alert, the next video will be another AFC North team based in Ohio, the Cleveland Browns. But for the moment being, let's take a look at the Cincinnati Bengals here. So this is definitely one of the most interesting teams to talk about in the National Football League right now. Looking at their playoff history, this was a team that from 1990 until 2020 had won zero playoff games. That is right, 3 decades with zero playoff wins. So they are now entering, I would say, a golden age of their franchise. Definitely one of the most notable runs, I guess you want to call it, in the NFL, both right now and honestly, when looking back, this could be one of those runs we're talking about for a very long time. 2021, it all really comes together for them out of nowhere, mostly attributed to the dynamic duo of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. They're able to go all the way to Super Bowl 56, surprising many, many people along the road there and upsetting Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and the Kansas City Chiefs at Arrowhead in the AFC title game. Only loss that Patrick Mahomes has had in the playoffs to somebody not named Tom Brady. So last year in 2022, pick up right where they left off. They finished the season with a 12-4 record, an improvement from the year prior, and they end up getting right back to the conference championship game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Although this time they do come up just short. That is definitely emerging as one of, if not the best rivalry in the NFL today. Apologies. It would seem that my Cincinnati Bengals page is not up here. Here we go. So looking at the 2022 Bengals more in depth, of course coached by head coach Zach Taylor, the 12-4 record. One thing I do think is very interested to note here is that looking at their schedule, they start off with an 0-2 record. They started off a bit rough in 2021 as well, although they do have a couple more losses here in the month of October, losing to two division opponents, the Baltimore Ravens and the Cleveland Browns. So as of Halloween last year on week 8, they were sitting there with a 4-4 record. And as we mentioned, they finished 12-4. So they would go on to win the final 8 games of the season, caught fire in November and December, not losing a single football game over that span. Then they get to the NFL playoffs where they win their first 2 games against the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. And they beat the Buffalo Bills in very convincing fashion, a team that was had their sights set on Super Bowl 57 for sure. Then ultimately losing here to the Kansas City Chiefs on January 29th. So looking down at some of the more individual statistics for the Cincinnati Bengals, we could see Joe Burrow just continues to be the gold standard of the quarterback position. He really is somebody who, when you watch him play, when you watch him take snaps under center, he seems like a natural evolution of Tom Brady as one of the best players just inside the pocket. And if he's able to further develop his abilities mentally, pre-snap, being able to read defenses like we've seen Patrick Mahomes do at the NFL level, the sky's really the limit for Joe Burrow. He really is the master of the 3-step drop, get the ball out quick, find the open man, pick up the first down, make sure we pick up W's as well. All about picking up the W's with this guy. So looking at the wide receivers down here, as we mentioned, Jamar Chase, absolute beast at the wide receiver position. He, of course, was Joe Burrow's teammate and at LSU won the national title together and has since been tearing up the NFL since coming into the league in 2021. Does only play 12 games last year due to injury shortened season, but even then in only 12 games he's able to crack 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. So very scary what the possibility, what his ceiling could be in a full 17 game season this year. Although definitely some dark clouds hanging over Cincinnati Bengals training camp right now, and we will discuss that in just a little bit. But still talking about the 2022 Bengals for a moment, they did have both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins crossed the 1,000-yard threshold, so definitely strong at the wide receiver position, and even Tyler Boyd with 762 yards and 5 touchdowns. So Cincinnati, honestly, they probably have one of, if not the best, wide receiving corps in the National Football League right now. Looking at them on the ground, Joe Mixon with 814 yards on the ground and 7 touchdowns, with Samaje Perine another 394 and 2 touchdowns. So very impressive stuff from the Bengals on the ground. And even Joe Burrow with 250 yards and another 5 touchdowns. So considering they have an identity as a passing team, they definitely were able to maintain somewhat of a ground presence as well. Joe Mixon definitely I'm not going to say one of the more underrated running backs in the NFL, because he definitely has gotten his fair share of accolades and praise over the years. He's been in the NFL since, I believe, 2017, so been in the NFL. This will be his 7th season then. So he's definitely been around the block. People know what he brings to the table, but he always seems to be consistent for them, delivering right around that 1,000-yard mark, and always a big red zone threat for them as well. Looking down at the defense, this is a defense that was able to get to the quarterback relatively consistently. Trey Hendrickson, their only Pro Bowler on defense. The only other two on offense being Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Although the Pro Bowl isn't actually played anymore, they still give the honor out to these players anyways. Much deserved by Trey Hendrickson, though, getting to the quarterback 8 times, 3 forced fumbles, in addition to leading the team in quarterback hits. So Sam Hubbard, one of the leaders of the defense as well, 6.5 sacks. And then can look at the interception numbers here as well. Von Bell, Jesse Bates leading the charge here, both of their starting safeties with 4 interceptions apiece. But that is probably a good segue into the Bengals 2023 offseason, because 2 of the notable losses they endured are Jesse Bates and Von Bell. Both of their starting safeties depart in free agency. So just to review here real quick, left-hand column going to be your 2022 team that players played for. Right-hand column is going to represent who they are now on in 2023, along with their snap percentage over here. So you'll notice the Bengals really didn't bring in too many free agents. We'll go over their departures first before we get into who they've acquired, but definitely the 2 most notable departures were their starting safeties, Jesse Bates taking off to the Atlanta Falcons, then Von Bell also departing to the NFC South, although he chooses to go to the Carolina Panthers. Another loss in the secondary, Eli Apple. He departs for the Miami Dolphins, played 87% of snaps on defense last year. Definitely will be somebody that's going to be missed in the Bengals secondary, although I think they'll be able to recover from the loss of Eli Apple a little bit easier than both of their starting safeties. Another guy they lose here, Hayden Hurst, their tight end, taken off to the Carolina Panthers as well, joining Von Bell down there. And rounding it out for their losses is Samaje Perine is the last player I'll mention here, and he takes off to the Denver Broncos, which is right here. A little hard to see because both of them are orange, but Samaje Perine will be a member of the Denver Broncos this year, leaving a bit of a gap at that backup running back spot behind Joe Mixon, which we'll look at when we get to their depth chart. But then looking at the acquisitions in free agency, the Bengals really don't add too much. They do have Trevor Siemian up here as well. Not that that's super notable. I mean, it potentially could be if Joe Burrow misses the start of the season, which we'll talk about in a second. But down here, the notable additions, the huge one is Orlando Brown. Snag him from the Kansas City Chiefs, their starting left tackle. And this is big for a couple reasons. Obviously, makes the Bengals offensive line significantly better, but also takes away Patrick Mahomes' starting left tackle. So they're trying to get over that hump in the AFC Championship game again against the Kansas City Chiefs, be able to take them out in the AFC playoffs. That's the way to do it. Want to take one of their best players away, have him join your squad. Other players they brought in of note, we'll mention Nick Scott of the Los Angeles Rams, member of that Super Bowl 56 team that narrowly defeated the Bengals. Really did come oh so very close to winning that Super Bowl in 2021. I think they'll be back, though, very soon. And then finally, we'll mention Irv Smith. He'll be the replacement for Hayden Hurst at the tight end spot. They bring him in from, of course, the Minnesota Vikings. So now we can also look at the Bengals draft class in 2023. They do have all their first round picks and an additional sixth here. Nothing really earth shattering, although I will say Miles Murphy, good value here at the 28th overall selection. He was somebody definitely getting some consideration earlier on in the first round. Can give them some more juice, I guess, on that defensive line, a little more oomph when it comes to getting to the quarterback. And they also add two more defensive backs in the second and third round here. DJ Turner is going to be competing for a cornerback position, and Jordan Battle at safety can definitely be somebody who provides them some depth this year and can potentially step in and play if called upon. Then they add some more depth to their skill positions down here in the middle rounds before rounding it out by taking a punter and a cornerback. So definitely the Bengals are a team that is clearly all in this year. They're not really trying to reinvent the wheel. Their core is already in place. They're just trying to add to it. So all in all, I'd say the Cincinnati Bengals offseason was a pretty solid one. They did lose a few key players, but that's going to happen when you're competitive. And as we see over the next couple of years with their big name players coming up for contract extensions, this is something that they're going to have to deal with and be able to manage, as we've seen teams like the Kansas City Chiefs have to deal with, as teams like the Buffalo Bills are going to have to deal with upcoming. It's a cold world in the salary cap era, to say the least, but smart front offices, they're able to get around this, and teams with a strong winning culture, they're able to stay competitive for a reason. So now let's look ahead at the Bengals depth chart. Now, the Bengals did release their first unofficial depth chart just a couple days ago, like most teams have been doing this week, although I will say it's nearly identical to the one on our lads here, so I won't really bring that up. All the starting positions on offense and defense, I want to say, were exactly the same, so we'll use this page for reference as of right now. Starting at the quarterback position, Joe Burrow, he's the man. He's going to be their starting quarterback, absolutely, although when training camp opened up, did have that scary calf injury. Sounds like it's not going to be keeping him out super long term, but they have been incredibly vague, as most NFL fans I'm sure know at this point. Bengals have been very vague as to when Joe Burrow will be making his return. Could be by week 1, could be by week 3, could be by week 5. Who really knows? And then, of course, Jamar Chase coming out making the comment that, yeah, you know what, Joe? Take your 10 weeks. We got the first 4 weeks of the regular season. Don't sweat that. But we'll look at the Bengals schedule here in just a little bit. And I don't know if I would be that confident if I were Jamar Chase, because the Bengals do have a couple key games early on in their schedule. And in as tight of a division as they're playing in, those could definitely be games that they'll want come the end of the season. So looking at the running back position now, we have Joe Mixon absolutely slated to start here as the Bengals running back, although there is sort of an open competition behind him right now. Definitely Trayvon Williams and Chase Brown are currently competing in camp for this backup role. Although, like with most running back committees around the league right now, I'm sure both of these guys will see plenty of snaps once we get to the regular season in-game action. Joe Mixon can't be out there every play. They will need somebody to call upon to relieve him. Moving on to tight end, Hayden Hurst departed, as we mentioned, so Irv Smith figures to be the primary target here at the tight end spot. Could potentially be a big step up in terms of opportunity for him coming from Minnesota. His job was kind of sort of taken last year once they traded for TJ Hawkinson in Minnesota, so Irv Smith has a chance to get his career back on track, playing with an elite quarterback, so maybe he's in for a career year, who knows. Definitely dependent on when Joe Burrow comes back, but won't get a ton of targets because the Bengals are absolutely loaded at the wide receiver spot as well. As we mentioned before, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd all returning for the 2023 campaign, arguably the best receiving trio in the National Football League right now. Though there is a bit of a competition for that fourth spot behind him, some of the players in the mix are Trenton Irvin up here. We also have Charlie Jones, their rookie drafted in the 4th round this year, be competing for reps, as well as Andre Iosivas. I hope I am pronouncing that young man's name correctly. So the three of them will be battling out for the number 4 receiving position, but Honestly, so long as the three of these guys are healthy, Irv Smith's healthy, Joe Mixon's healthy, I don't know if these guys will even be seeing the field too much. Definitely good to have some depth, though. Looking now at the Bengals' offensive line, as we mentioned in their free agent acquisitions, the huge one is Orlando Brown Jr. He is going to be their left tackle likely for years to come, originally of the Baltimore Ravens, though he did spend the last 2 seasons in Kansas City. So he'll be holding down Joe Burrow's blind side, definitely going to be giving him some solid protection so long as he stays upright. Moving on to the guard position, Cordell Volson figures to be starting as their left guard, Ted Karras as their center, Alex Kappa at the right guard position, and then there is a bit of a competition going on at the right tackle spot right now between Jonah Williams and Jackson Carman. Earlier this summer, it is interesting to note that Jonah Williams did request a trade from the Cincinnati Bengals, although he has since taken a step back on that request and said, yeah, you know what, this is the place I want to be, I'm happy to be here, he just wants to come out and win some games. And I really don't blame him, because the Bengals do have absolutely one of the best rosters in the National Football League right now. Certainly one of the best winning cultures, it would seem, as well. Definitely have a lot of mojo and camaraderie, just looking from the outside at that locker room. Especially compared to some of the other teams in the AFC, definitely have my concerns with a team like Buffalo, like we mentioned in that video, with Stephon Diggs clearly being frustrated with Josh Allen during the playoffs and over the course of the offseason. But who am I to say that? I'm not in the locker room. Moving on to the defense now. The Bengals' defensive line is honestly a bit of an underrated unit, I will say. They are probably... You could make the case that by the end of the season, they could be a top 10 unit in the NFL. I'd say they're probably a fringe top 10 unit in the NFL as of this moment. Of course, Sam Hubbard is their big name guy here. Absolutely their leader on defense, much like Joe Burrow is on the offensive side of the football. Trey Hendrickson starting opposite of him, another absolute game wrecker. As we mentioned, he went to the Pro Bowl last year. Then you have DJ, the two J's in the middle here, DJ Reader and BJ Hill, two defensive tackles. So definitely a solid unit there. And then they add Myles Murphy to the mix as well, their first round pick from this year. So definitely look forward to seeing what he's able to do in this Bengals defense, learning behind a guy like Sam Hubbard, being able to come in and relieve him when he starts to get tired or, God forbid, he gets injured. Then you do even have some other young players on here as well. Zach Carter, second-year player, and Joseph Osai, the third-year player. So, not a bad unit at all for the Bengals on the defensive line. Looking at their linebacker situation, Bengals are definitely a team that typically will roll more of a secondary-heavy unit, so hence why there's only 2 linebackers listed here. We have Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. Nothing really knocking your socks off like some of these other teams, say the Buffalo Bills or the Baltimore Ravens in the AFC, who really seem to value the linebacker position, or even the Chicago Bears in the NFC. But that's all right, though, because Cincinnati's a team that definitely values their secondary. And let's take a glance at that now. So like we mentioned, they did lose both of their starting safeties, though they do bring in Nick Scott to take over one of those safety positions. And they have Dax Hill, their first-round pick from last year, starting opposite of him. And they do go out this year and draft Jordan Battle in the 3rd round. So they do have still not a bad spot to be at all in the secondary, especially at the safety position, considering they lost both of their starters. And then on their corners, we have Cameron Taylor-Britt slated to start at one of the cornerback positions, with Chidobe Awuzie as the other cornerback. So not a bad spot to be in at all. And then they do have Mike Hilton starting as their nickel corner. There is a bit of a competition going on for the 4th cornerback spot at the moment. Do have their 2nd round pick, DJ Turner, in the mix there. They bring in Sidney Jones, former Eagles draft pick, last played with the Las Vegas Raiders. He certainly figures to be playing a key role in that competition there, as well as Alan George, who has been making a push at training camp and could definitely see some reps here. And the Bengals secondary was injured and a bit battered last year, so whoever emerges from this competition could definitely see some notable regular season reps. Oh, I meant to mention this earlier with the right tackle position too. Lyle Collins is currently on the PUP list. He tore his ACL in December of last year, but if he's able to get back and healthy this year, he is somebody who could see some reps as well if injury were to occur, formerly of the Dallas Cowboys. Right, so that just about does it for all the Bengals competitions at camp right now. That's their pretty much the crux of the pecking order they have so far at their offense and defense for their depth chart. Obviously, this is not a finalized depth chart by any means. Training camp's still going on for several more weeks, and a lot of these positions will be in flux, though. It seems like Cincinnati has their starters picked out for the most part, and many of these training camp battles are simply to find out who the reserves are. Not a bad spot to be in at all. So now moving along to the Bengals' schedule this year. So currently I do have the Bengals projected to finish atop the AFC North Division with a 13-4 record. Although, as you could see, it's very close. Sorry, I want to make sure Baltimore's all figured out here. Sometimes I go back through this and I tinker around with these and then just games get messed up, but I can assure you this is the correct order now. So, my apologies. Cincinnati, I do have projected to win this division with a 13-4 record, but as you can see, I have them dropping their first two games to Cleveland on the road and then Baltimore at home. And this is kind of under the assumption that Joe Burrow isn't ready to start the season. And even if he is, those could still be very difficult games for them. But if Joe Burrow isn't healthy and not on the field for those games, I have a very difficult time seeing the Bengals pulling those games out. But the Bengals have really never been known as a September team under the Joe Burrow, Zach Taylor, Jamar Chase era, Sam Hubbard, whatever you want to call this era of Bengals football. Never really been known for their hot starts to the season. They've been a team that kind of comes out of the gate all right, just kind of floating around, lingering in that middle of the pack, and then when we get to November, December, January, that's when they really seem to catch fire. So with the Bengals schedule here, I actually have them projected to go 3-3 heading into their bye week of week 7. And then coming out of that, I only have them losing one more game the remainder of the season, that being to the Pittsburgh Steelers. But even then, that shows you just how thin their margin for error is if they were to get off to a slow start. So that's why when I said earlier, if Joe Burrow or, Jamar Chase is making comments about, oh, well, Joe Burrow could just sit out the first month of the season, we'll be okay. All right, even if the Bengals do go 2-2 these first 4 weeks, that means you would have to win all but 2 of these remaining games to be able to go 13-4. And I know what you're thinking. The Bengals don't necessarily need to go 13-4. And while that may prove to be true, say they were to hypothetically lose another game to the Baltimore Ravens here on the road, or to the San Francisco 49ers here, another very talented team, or even the Kansas City Chiefs. This isn't all out of the realm of possibility. Still definitely a winning record here, but Bengals will quickly find themselves out of the playoffs in that scenario, even with the 10-7 record, which they had the year they went to the Super Bowl. I do believe the AFC is simply going to just be that competitive this season, but certainly worth keeping an eye on with the Cincinnati Bengals this year. I do think that they will end up being atop the AFC North when all is said and done, but it will take one heck of a run for them. I do think it would benefit to have Joe Burrow in there those first 2 weeks, even if he isn't exactly 100%. I know that may end up coming back to bite him if he re-aggravates his injury, but from what Joe Burrow's comments have been, it doesn't sound like that injury is too severe. So then going back to the playoffs. So my playoff predictions, sorry, this resets sometimes, but I remember what they were. Going back to my playoff predictions, I do have the Cincinnati Bengals matched up against the New York Jets in the wild card round, and that could certainly be a very intriguing matchup, especially at the quarterback position. Aaron Rodgers versus Joe Burrow, and the Bengals offense having to go up against that very talented Jets defense. Of course, Sauce Gardner versus Jamar Chase be one heck of a matchup. Quinnen Williams going up against that Cincinnati offensive line that should be improved. This definitely figures to be the best offensive line Joe Burrow has had so far in his career. The Bengals have not had a track record of very solid offensive lines during his time there, especially in 2021 when they went to the Super Bowl, though it did improve slightly last year, and I think with the addition of Orlando Brown, it'll only continue to see steps in the right direction. Now moving on to the divisional round, I have Kansas City beating the Chargers, yes, but I have the Cincinnati Bengals matched up against the Buffalo Bills in a rematch of the divisional round last year. And this is why it's important the Bengals win as many games as they do here to go 13-4, because they get the home field in the first round against the Jets, and they also get it in the second round here against the Bills. And I know home field advantage really doesn't mean anything to the Bengals. They went on the road twice in 2021, defeated the first seeded Tennessee Titans, and then the mighty Kansas City Chiefs in the conference championship game. And then just this past year, they defeated Buffalo in the snow on the road in very convincing fashion. So doesn't really seem to be too much of a setback for the Bengals to be on the road, but let's be real. Anytime you're playing a football game in January, you want it to be on your home field in front of your own fans. And I do think the Bengals would beat the Buffalo Bills if they were to rematch again. Then moving on to the conference championship game, I'm projecting for the third straight year we would have a Kansas City Chiefs versus not the Buffalo Bills, the Cincinnati Bengals, that's who we're talking about, at Arrowhead Field once again. And while I do believe this will once again be a very, very close game, I think the Bengals are just going to be a touch more hungry. They're going to be wanting it just a little bit more. And the Cincinnati Bengals should advance back to their second Super Bowl in 3 seasons, and of course their third straight conference championship game. But once they get to the Super Bowl, I think the magic carpet ride will end, and they will succumb to the Philadelphia Eagles, who are just superior on both sides of the ball. I really have a tough time finding a team that has as much talent as the Philadelphia Eagles right now, just all around on their roster. Jalen Hurts is one of those few quarterbacks who can certainly go toe-to-toe with Joe Burrow, and their offensive line, defensive line, secondary, receivers, however you want to slice it, it's hard to find a position where the Cincinnati Bengals have a decisive advantage over the Eagles. So I will give the Eagles the edge, although it is entirely possible Joe Burrow is able to rally the Cincinnati Bengals to their first ever Super Bowl win. And I definitely think it's fascinating to look at the landscape of the National Football League right now, because we're definitely at a transitional period right now with many of the veteran quarterbacks with Super Bowl rings retiring over the last few years. We think of Eli Manning, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, and of course the GOAT himself, Thomas Edward Patrick Brady, retiring after the 2022 NFL season. Currently, there are only 4 quarterbacks who have a Super Bowl ring in the NFL, and that is of course due to guys like Nick Foles and Joe Flacco quietly fading into retirement this offseason as well. Though they haven't officially announced their retirement, we're well into training camp. The preseason's about to start, and neither of those gentlemen are currently on an NFL team. Hats off to them, though. They've had terrific NFL careers. They should be very proud of what they achieved. But with an eye to the future, the only 4 quarterbacks in the league right now with Super Bowl rings are Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, and Patrick Mahomes. And besides Patrick Mahomes, the other 3 players are all certainly on the back end of their career. And it's entirely possible Aaron Rodgers could win one with the New York Jets. Another one, I suppose I should say, his second. Entirely possible that Russell Wilson could rally the Broncos to one, though I think that is a long shot in the AFC right now. I don't even have them projected to make the playoffs, though I do think they'll be right around 500. And then Matthew Stafford did just win his first with the Los Angeles Rams 2 years ago, but seems the narrative with the Rams is they sold their souls to win that Super Bowl on their home field, and I have a difficult time imagining they win it again very soon, at least while Matthew Stafford is still there. So besides Patrick Mahomes now, who has 2 Super Bowl rings, the only quarterback with multiple Super Bowl rings, that landscape is wide open for another quarterback to really assert himself as one of the premier names in the NFL. And this Super Bowl between the Bengals and the Eagles could be a very fascinating one for that reason. Both of the last 2 Super Bowl losers, Jalen Hurts going up against Joe Burrow, a lot would really be on the line for that. It feels like the scales would very much be even in a game like that. because of course Patrick Mahomes going into last year's Super Bowl already had one under his belt, whereas Jalen Hurts did not. So it would be a fresh experience for both of those young quarterbacks. Now finally, before we wrap this video up, take a quick glance at Cincinnati's salary cap situation. Do think it's interesting to take a look at this, especially for the Bengals, because they have a lot of big names upcoming that are going to be due for a contract. Biggest one, of course, is Joe Burrow. Which is really unfortunate because of his injury. I still think he will end up being the highest paid player in NFL history, but it seemed like right after Justin Herbert signed his deal that a Joe Burrow deal was intimate. So I do expect that to happen sometime, if not during the course of this season, definitely in the 2024 offseason. He's going to get some sort of mega deal that starts in 2025. And if the Bengals were smart, they would want to sign that sooner, so they can maybe offset some of that burden of the salary cap onto 2024 or maybe even 2023 if they're able to get a little bit creative with how they structure that deal. Looking at the running back position, they do have Joe Mixon for the next 2 seasons. He actually took a bit of a pay cut to stay with the Cincinnati Bengals, which you have to respect. Honestly, at $8.5 million, Joe Mixon is underpaid. Pretty much any running back these days is, just an unfortunate nature of the game, but certainly worth every penny of that $8.5 million. I don't know if he'll be able to remain with the Bengals after 2024, though, because they are going to have to pay a lot of other players here. Wide receiver is really what we're talking about here. So they have both Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins in a contract year this year. So even if they wanted to hit one of those guys with the franchise tag, the other one would be free to explore the open market. Likely T. Higgins would get hit with the franchise tag, and Tyler Boyd would be able to see what he's worth out on the open market. So definitely why that competition for the wide receiver 4 spot is of the utmost importance for the Bengals, because they do need somebody to step up. Of course, they could always sign a veteran themselves in free agency next summer, or next spring, I guess I should say, but that's cap space you could be using somewhere else. And likewise with a draft pick, you could draft another receiver, but you would really like to use that draft position on perhaps another offensive lineman or somebody for their secondary if they continue to lose players there. So definitely a sticky situation the Bengals could potentially find themselves in at wide receiver. And then if T. Higgins is hit with the franchise tag and can't agree to a long-term deal, also puts you in a tough spot, because then he's due to become a free agent in 2025, much like Joe Mixon. And then you also have Jamar Chase, who almost certainly will be exercised his club option for 2025, but I imagine he'll get some sort of mega deal starting in 2026. That'll probably be signed after this season, honestly, because he will be eligible for it in the 2024 offseason. Looking at their tight end situation, Irv Smith only signed a 1-year deal, so pretty much have nobody invested in the tight end position here beyond 2023. Another position worth keeping an eye on for sure. Then looking at the offensive line, Jonah Williams in a contract year. He's in competition to be their starting right tackle, hence why he requested a trade earlier this summer. He probably wanted an extension here starting in 2024, but as we're looking at the Bengals cap situation, it's going to be tough for them to afford to do so. Then looking at, where's their other guy at here? Jackson Carman. So he signed for the next 2 seasons. They have him listed as a guard on Spotrac, but he's only signed for the next 2 seasons. If I had to guess, they might even just roll with him as their starting right tackle in 2024. But again, this is another player that would be due for a raise in 2025. So the Bengals window is very much 2023, potentially 2024, before Joe Burrow perhaps hits his mid-career lull, as we see with quarterbacks very commonly with the elite quarterbacks, if Cincinnati isn't able to play their cards right here. Then looking ahead to the defense, they have big money invested in Trey Hendrickson for the next few seasons. Very well deserved. Same with Sam Hubbard. But DJ Reader's in a contract year this year. BJ Hill only signed for this year and next year, so potential hole at the interior of the defensive line. Miles Murphy on that rookie deal, though, so they are definitely set at the defensive edge position for the next few years. Looking at linebacker, not really too much doing here. Both of their starters, Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson, locked up long term at reasonable cap hits, so that's definitely a relief. And then finally looking at the secondary, Nick Scott signed to a 3-year deal, so he'll be around. Daxton Hill still has another 3 seasons, plus his potential 5th-year option, as well as Mike Hilton signed for just this season and next year, and Awuzie just signed for this year. So Cincinnati's definitely in a bit of a bind here, potentially starting in 2024. Definitely seems like their window is right now. Um, they do have some flexibility for the 2024 cap still, but they have to be very wise at how they spend it. They even do project players' market values as of right now on the right here. And geez, T. Higgins would be due for $20 million and Tyler Boyd another 15. So just between those two players, that's $35 million. That right there gets their salary cap next year to what it is for this year. And that doesn't even include other players like a Jonah Williams. So, or anybody for the tight end position. So I'd love to know what any thoughts are out there on the Cincinnati Bengals. Is this a team that's destined to go back to the Super Bowl this year? Is Joe Burrow going to be ready for the start of the season? Where do you think Joe Burrow is among the top quarterbacks right now? Honestly, I'd have him number 2 right behind Patrick Mahomes. And I'm saying that as a Philadelphia Eagles fan. I do think Jalen Hurts made tremendous strides last year, but as of right now, it's Patrick Mahomes and then it's Joe Burrow for me. He really is just so refined with how he plays the quarterback position, able to get the ball out just so quickly, master of moving inside the pocket, and he really is able to rally that team to victory. So that's all I've got on the Cincinnati Bengals, and look forward to discussing the Cleveland Browns in the next one. Have a nice day.